Hello and welcome to all you lovers of road trips, roadside attractions, and all things just a little bit odd, strange, or even quirky. I'm Nadia Giordana, and my partner here in odd is Lynn Garthwaite. Hey, Lynn.
Hey, Nadia.
Well, it's fun to be here today.
Absolutely.
We're getting this off the ground. This is our first episode of That's Odd. And let's maybe start by talking about that first road trip we took a couple of years ago when we had no plans for a show.
This was not on our radar at all. We just thought, wouldn't it be fun to drive to Alexandria and see the Runestone? Kind of a famous landmark in the area, and it seemed like something kind of fun to explore, and so we just did that. We hopped in a car and drove out there and had a great day.
Well, and it was fun because we really didn't know each other that well. We still don't, although we're getting to know each other.
We know we're odd.
We know we're odd, and we're getting to know each other better all the time. But we had such fun on that trip, and I think for me, I discovered how much fun it was to do an impromptu road trip, because that one certainly wasn't planned in advance, and had a lot of fun, took pictures, did a little bit of video, a lot of things like that. And here it was maybe 2 years later when we started having a discussion about doing a show, and I came up with an idea that was pretty standard for community TV, and you...
Because maybe I'm odder? Yeah, I just thought, you know what, that set the standard for what we needed to do. We needed to visit the quirky things that we could get to by car and maybe someday by plane. Think big. But just go out and see what's out there and laugh a little. I think we laughed a lot.
A lot. I like a lot. Yeah. We did, and I think one of the funny things in my head after we had our meeting that one day when we started to talk about doing a show was that I had a completely different idea in my head about what we might do, and by the time I got done talking with you, I'm thinking, oh, that's good. Yeah. This is great. I want to do her idea.
Well, I guess I tend to think quirky. I think what would be kind of a funny thing, what would make people want to tune in maybe and to see what are we up to this week, because based on what we've done so far, which viewers will be seeing, we've done a few funny things, and I think they'll enjoy it.
I think so too, and I think it tends to come across, I tend to be maybe a little more conservative. I suppress the odd and quirky. I love it, but it's coming out now more, and we're having fun with that. So, well, then we had to move forward.
That's right. We came up with the idea. We had a studio that was willing to work with us, but we had to create a set. And that was an adventure in itself. I think we started out by looking at properties for sale. We didn't have much of an income, so we had to look at some pretty rundown things, but a little bit of grease and elbow grease and work, and we got it going.
Yeah, and look what we have here now today. And one of the things I think that occurred to me as we were pounding nails and sawing boards. You did a lot of sawing of the board pieces.
That was an all-day affair, right?
Yes.
We did some painting. We did some home ec-related things.
Yeah. I'm surprised that this budding television relationship didn't bite the dust during some of that.
Speaking of dust.
Speaking of dust. There's certainly a lot of decisions that had to be made, a lot of changes that came up, and all the different things that we ran into, roadblocks.
Right.
But in the end, we ended up with a great set.
A great set, no injuries, no trips to the emergency room. That's pretty much a good story.
And we've been promoting on social media, and some of our friends have been indicating intense interest in coming online, and some of them don't live in the viewing area here for the show, but we'll be putting it online.
Right.
And we'll be able. What have people been saying to you?
They've been asked if we're going to have some guests, which we may down the line. That's a possibility. We have to have somebody who's a little quirky too. No, sober politician types. Yeah, just asking what some of the topics we're going to be talking about. Where are we going? Where are we driving to on our next adventure? We're going to be seeing some of that. So I think everybody's just curious about what we're covering, and a lot of them have great ideas. You know, have you heard of? Have you seen? Will you be going to? We've been getting a lot of that, so we're taking great notes, and the viewers have been calling in. So we will take suggestions.
And Lynn, let's talk a little bit about you and your book and some of your background, real in a nutshell, kind of fun and interesting things.
I'm an author. I did start out writing children's books, although I'm segging into some others, and my most recent book was layman's terms version of how our states got their crazy shapes.
I know, I love that.
So why we have the boot heels and the panhandles, why Minnesota has the crazy little top knot. There's, as it turns out, an odd and quirky explanation for almost all of it, and fascinating. I never thought Minnesota history or American history could be that interesting, but it turned out it was fascinating, and I've enjoyed it. So what have you been up to?
Well, by the way, I've read your book, and I go back to it every now and then, and we will be doing little pieces of it now and then on the show because it is interesting and quirky information. And as for me, I'm retired, and I work on volunteer-wise on 3 or 4 other community TV shows. And that's what gave me the idea that we should be doing one that's just completely off the wall and completely for fun and just of interest to the viewers. So that's what I've been doing a lot of lately, and it brought us here to this point, and it's been like totally fun. And I think probably now we're at a point where let's cut away and look at some of the clips and segments from what we went through when we built this set.
Hold on to your seats. 30 yards to go?
Oh, I can't believe how much we've gotten done in the last,
I know.
what is it, 3-4 weeks?
Oh, it seems like 3 or 4 years, but yeah. Built a big set. This is the end.
But from what we started with, holy buckets.
This is great, yep.
I know.
It's been a project.
I learned how to do pinch pleats.
Yep. We mastered that. We hammered a few nails. Yep.
And we'll have to hang these doggone things. This whole bunch of drapes weighs so much.
Do you know how to make grommets?
Yes, I have a tool for that.
And a bedazzler?
I don't know what a bedazzler is.
To add all the sprinkles and the
we
glitter.
can do that. We can do that. Yeah, all right.
Let's just get it done, yeah.
Yeah, let's just get this done.
Whew.
Oh. Wasn't that fun?
I thought it was a great time. It was hysterical. I can't believe we built this beautiful set out of that, but it was a lot of hard work. Like I said, no injuries.
No injuries.
Little issue with paint that didn't always end up on the boards, but we're okay. We're okay.
You know, now they know what we were talking about when we talk about some of those things that come up and how it's a good thing we aren't a married couple or anything like that. If you were a husband and wife and a married couple, those are the kind of things that could end the entire relationship.
That's true.
Or build it stronger.
We just got in different cars and drove home after that, so we're good. So that was a lot of fun, a lot of work. It shows what you can do with a little bit of an imagination, and take your imagination and run with that.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah.
And I think now that we've got this ready to go and we're talking about some of the interesting things that we do, I'd love to hear a story or two from our States Have Odd Shapes, because those are fun.
Thank you. Yeah, one of my favorites when I was doing the research was Maryland, the territory of Maryland before they became a state. They got into border discrepancies with every surrounding territory, and they lost every single one of them. They didn't win a single debate, and part of it was the King of England, who was making the decisions at that time, kept stepping in and taking over. And at the time, Maryland now, as you know, it has an extremely skinny little neck. And at the time, early days, it was much wider, and that was fine. They liked that. But it turned out that that border ran right smack through the middle of the town of Philadelphia. And Pennsylvania was not happy with the idea of Maryland taking half of that town. So they knew something had to be done. The King of England stepped in, and it took about 100 years to come up with the final decision, but they settled on a much lower border for Maryland, which gave them that scrawny, skinny little neck. And like I said, they lost every argument they had. They have one of the odder-shaped states, and it's because other territories kept kind of digging in on them. So that was one of my most interesting stories, I thought.
Well, that is very interesting. You just don't know the history that goes on behind the scenes 200 years ago,
Right.
100 years ago, when these states were forming. And even us that live here in Minnesota, I don't know what gave us that little top knot at the top of Minnesota. But those are the things that sometime, I think I heard about it in 6th grade, but I don't remember that story anymore.
And I didn't know that story at all, actually, until I started researching. So, and I was a lifelong Minnesotan. So that's what I have found interesting, that the things that you feel like you should have known growing up never came up. And I think what happens is in American history classes, they have so much to cover that they just can't get into these little details. And it's these little details that turn out to be the most interesting. So it was worth it for a whole book.
Well, what are give us another idea of a quirky story that happened with a state shape.
Well, let's do the Minnesota top knot. It was all because of an error in information when the border between the United States and Canada was being formed. So to the East Coast, it had been done on kind of a piecemeal basis as we were moving west. And by the time they got to the Mississippi River, it was clear that we were going to be filling out the rest of the continent. So they decided the two countries needed to just settle on a border. And they settled on the 49th parallel. And both sides misunderstood how far north of the Lake of the Woods stretched. And their understanding was that it fell short of the 49th parallel. So when they decided that line, it would be all part of the United States. Years later, when they got to surveying it, they found out that the Lake of the Woods actually extended much farther north than anybody thought. And so they either had to rewrite the entire treaty, which would have been very burdensome, or do what they did, which was to basically draw a little line up and around the Lake of the Woods and then continue all the way west on the 49th parallel.
So it was based on complete misinformation.
It was, and many of our borders were based on bad surveying, errors. There are some border wars continuing to this day that were because of surveying errors. A lot of it was just misunderstanding of where things started and stopped, and fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating to research.
Did any of the states' borders come about that had to do with feuding or?
Very early on the east side, it was like constant border battles. And that's why they decided at some time, we just need to get out and survey this. We need to actually set some solid borders because people, you know, it was a case, taxes were a problem. One territorial governor would be charging taxes to people who were pretty sure they lived in the territory next door, but nobody could prove it one way or the other. And so this became a big issue. And it was also hard for law enforcement they didn't know where their boundaries started and stopped. So there were a lot of border wars going on. All of them had quirky little names. You know, there was the Creesap War, was a border war on the East Coast. Things that you'd never heard about and don't need to know about necessarily. But it was constant throughout. And even as we moved west, each territory wanted to claim bigger and better parts, with some exceptions. And exceptions had to do with the gold rush. And that's an entire chapter in my book on how territories were actually willing to give up land because the gold rush was bringing in such not the best kind of people coming into their territories, and some of them were willing to cut off the borders just to get rid of that problem.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, that gives you a little bit of a background of some of the odd things about our states. And Lynn and I also are doing something when we're not running around the state together. We're snapping pictures and little clips of video, different things that we call our drive-by sightings. And we're going to look at a couple of those right now.
kitty party. I couldn't leave, couldn't find the door, till I learned what my eyes were for. I discovered I had x-ray.
And welcome back. We are going to close the show with a couple of quirky little pieces of information. We're calling it the Did You Know segment. The first one I have to offer is, did you know that when pandas are moved from China to other places around the world, they fly FedEx? China made a special deal with FedEx to have one airplane designated for that purpose. They painted the outside of it with pandas eating leaves, kind of an interesting look, I'm sure. And on the inside, they have clear-sided cages that the pandas ride in for their comfort. But who knew that FedEx was the one that was going to carry pandas all around the world?
I had no idea on that, but how cute. If I ever see a plane with pandas on
You'll
it,
know
I
what's in
know
there.
what the cargo is.
Exactly.
Well, I have one for you, too. Did you know that if you toss a penny 10,000 times, 10,000 times,
Okay.
it will not be heads 5,000 times?
Really?
Yeah, because the reason is, and I have to look at this, it's going to be more like 4,950 because the head side is a little bit heavier.
Oh.
So that means it weighs more, so it ends up on the bottom more often. So doesn't that mean you should always choose tails?
I would think.
Would that raise your odds a little bit?
If you're going to do it 5,000 times.
Speaking
or
of
10,000
odds.
times, you're sure.
That is
That
odd.
is an odd fact. Good to know. So if you're going to be betting, you know what to do. So, well, that's going to wrap it up for a half hour of unrehearsed stoogery from us. If you keep tuning in, we're going to keep turning out some entertaining, quirky, oddball stuff for you to watch. And in fact, coming right now, you're going to see the credits. Don't tune out. We're going to add some fun stuff in the credits. See you next time.